Hello everyone, welcome to another online Open Studio session. My name is Liesl Hartman and I work in the Center for Arts Education at the Zeitz MOCAA. The Zeitz MOCAA is our wonderful museum of contemporary art from Africa and it's located in Cape Town in South Africa. Today our online activity is inspired by the South African artist Senzeni Marasela. Senzeni Marasela lives in Soweto in the province of Gauteng in South Africa. We've just opened a very important solo show of Senzeni this week at the Zeitz MOCAA and we're very excited to have her exhibition in the building. Senzeni is a really exciting artist because she works in many different mediums. She draws and she paints, she takes photographs, she makes installations. And one of the important materials that she works with is cloth and textile. She makes interesting embroideries and she also works on blankets with interesting wool and fiber. And so today our activity is going to be inspired by her medium, but also by the content of the work and the stories that she tells about her mother, Theodorah. Senzeni has become a really well-known artist because of the story that she tells about her mother. She makes her artwork based on the story of her mother's life and one of her journeys that started in a place called Mvenyani to Johannesburg. Now, when her mother was alive and undertaking this journey, there were very unjust laws in South Africa, and it was called the period of apartheid, and it separated people who were from different races. People couldn't live together, and often families, like Senzeni's mother, were separated from their loved ones. They often didn't know where their loved ones went to when they went off to cities to work, and they spent sometimes a lot of their time waiting for them and looking for them. I'm sure you will all agree with me that this was a very unjust law in South Africa. Now, even though those days are past and we live in a different country, I think it's still important for us to be reminded of what happened during those years, and I think that's why Senzeni is inspired to do the work that she does. And even though that is a fairly sad and traumatic story of her mother, I think that it's important to know that Senzeni probably chooses to tell the story because she actually loved her mother very dearly and she must have really admired her as a strong woman during those days. Some of the photographs that she takes actually has a picture of herself dressed in her mother's dress as she went into the city looking for her husband. So today the materials that you are going to need is firstly a pair of scissors because we're going to do a fair amount of cutting. I'm going to use the fabric of an old t-shirt that is too small for me, and I like to use t-shirt material for this activity because it's stretchy. But you can use any little bits of cloth that you find around the house because we're going to cut those into strips and we're going to be wrapping. So it doesn't really matter what size your cloth is, as long as you have a big enough square in the beginning to start out with. Also, what you'll need is a little box and to scrounge around the house for little bits of wool or string or cotton, some little bits of ribbon as well if you have, because those you can use to actually decorate your character and to create the particular characteristics of your doll. So the first step in this process is that we're going to take our t-shirt, if you've got an old t-shirt, and you are going to cut it just under the arms. So here goes my old t-shirt, and I'm cutting it right under the arms. And I'm separating the top bit. I'm going to fold it and take it out of the way. And that's also some good fabric to use for later on. And I'm left with this piece of the cloth. Right, so the next step is that we need to cut more or less a square piece of fabric. And this will actually give us enough material to make one doll completely. So remember that your t-shirt is still joined at the ends. It's still stitched there and it has a hem at the bottom. And we actually want to cut those off. So I'm going to stand up just to give myself a bit better leverage. And I'm going to cut down the side. And when we work with cloth, guys, you may need quite a sharp scissor. So again, as you know, as we've said in the past, ask mom or dad or an adult or someone older, a bigger brother or sister, to help you to cut if you need some help. And again, all these little bits of offcuts, like all the activities that we've done in Open Studio this year, we keep our bits and pieces so that we can use them again in other projects. And I'm also cutting the hem of that fabric off. So guys, now that we've cut our hems off, we've actually got 2 pieces of fabric. We're going to put the one aside, which we're going to use in a minute, and the other one we're going to start creating the body of our doll. Now, if you look at the front of my table, I've actually laid the steps out. So I'm going to ask Tristan, who's behind our camera again today and helping me out, just to focus on that one. So this is step number 1. We've cut the square, and now we are going to create the little head, and I'm going to show you how to do that. So this is a bit of the hem that I cut off, and I'm just rolling it into a little ball very roughly and placing it in the center of my fabric, lifting my fabric up, and I'm creating the head of my doll. And you can really squish and get that shape to what you want it to be, right? And as you hold it, I'm just going to take a piece of wool to do the tying. You can cut your piece of string. You can use any string. You can use wool. You can use something like this if you have it, or even a piece of cotton. And I'm just going to wrap that under that little ball section, and I'm going to tie a really tight knot. So you wrap it really tightly and you tie it really tightly. So even that, guys, is a little doll or a little puppet at the moment, but we are going to create arms and legs as well. So like the example that I just showed you, we now have what looks like a sort of angel figure, I suppose, with wings. I'm just cutting those off to get them out the way. A little head and those sections there. The next step now is to cut into that fabric so that we create arms and legs. Right, so now I'm going to show you the cutting for our arms and legs. I'm going to ask Tristan again just to focus on my little example here. And this is one where we've already done the cutting, just roughly kind of giving you the shape of 2 arms and 2 legs. And let me show you how to do it with this one. So you take your scissor, not too close to the edge, guys. You want enough fabric. So you cut it about 3 or 4 centimeters down and into the middle. Don't cut it right across, just till about that point there. You're going to do exactly the same to the other side. And you're cutting it to that point there. And then we're going to cut up the middle, again, not all the way up to the head. So now we have 2 sections which are roughly legs and roughly arms. So guys, we've got our little figure where we've just started cutting legs and arms, and we're going to put that aside. And now we're going to go to that second piece of fabric, which was the same size that we used to start our figure. And we're going to fold it in half. We're going to fold it in half again, and one more time. And then we're going to take this piece of fabric and we're going to divide it up so that we can cut it into strips. So I've used a red koki on that, and it's just roughly to give us an idea of the width of the strips that we're now going to use to build the body of this wonderful character, this superhero, this person that we admire. If your cloth is too thick and your scissor won't go through all of it, then you can fold the cloth out like that a little bit so that it makes the cutting easier. But you can see there I've cut my first bit off and I've made a long strip like that. And that's what we're going to use to bind it around our fabric and to start making the body of the figure, much like this doll here, where you can see the binding has already started around the arms and moving down towards the body. Right, guys, so you've seen I've cut my second square into these sort of long strips or ribbons, and I'm going to show you how to prepare it so you make it easier for the wrapping and the tying off of each section. We don't really use any stitching or cotton in the first part of making our little doll, and that's what makes this activity so interesting, that you don't really have to use a needle and a thread. It's all about wrapping and binding. Now, when I first started making these dolls a couple of years ago and teaching it, I actually called this little project making my little moving hearts doll. And that's because the group that I was working with made these little dolls, and we gave it to the children in hospitals, children who were sick or incapacitated and were not able to do the things that other children were able to do, and we dedicated the dolls to those children. So you may want to create a little doll for yourself over Christmas and then gift it to somebody like that who you feel needs cheering up, or somebody who's in special need. And it's been a difficult year for all of us, guys, so there may be many people in that position at the moment. Now, Senzeni, if you look at her work about Theodorah, her photographs and her stories, you can see that she wears a yellow dress. She actually wore that yellow dress over a long period of time for many of the performances. So color is of a particular importance to her. And also the color red, you'll see it repeated in a lot of Senzeni's works. And she said that the red refers to the dust of Johannesburg and that red soil that you get in that part of the world. Now, I'm going to use a red strip just so that you can see the beginning of the tying or the binding of this cloth. And it really is about how you hold the fabric and then how you twist it through. So I generally start with the leg on my left, or the right-hand leg of the doll, and I hold it with that leg. And then I take the strip, I bind it round, pull it under what's going to become the arm. Sometimes it comes loose and you just need to get the hang of it, the hang of the binding, until the doll thickens a little bit, and round the other shoulder and down. And then you just continue that binding until you feel the doll sort of developing more of a body and strengthening. You can go backwards and forwards. There isn't really any particular direction. And you go round and round until you get to the end, and you can tie your strip off. Now, what I've actually forgotten to show you, so I apologize, I've skipped a step and I'm going to go back to it now, is that for each of your ribbons, before you start binding, is just to cut the end like you would a bandage if you didn't have a clip. You cut the end so that you have two loose pieces that you can actually tie together at the end. And this is what has happened here with my piece now. These are the two ends that I've tied, and I'm just going to wrap it all the way as far as I can go until there's enough that remains for me to tie off. Okay, and then I'm going to tie off that little piece of fabric like that, and I'm going to make a double knot. Okay, and that's going to start stiffening and building the body of the doll. And we can take the fabric and just pull it to cover the areas as we go. Now you can continue with the same color, you can use other colors, and you're just going to continue with the binding of that doll until you get to the end. I'm going to show you just how to complete the arm. So with the arm, because it's very long, you don't need a very long arm on your doll. And the nice thing about these little moving hearts dolls is sometimes one arm is longer, one arm is shorter. It doesn't really matter. It's okay if it's a little bit imperfect. Okay, I'm going to fold the end over just to shorten my arm, and I'm going to start with another strip of my fabric. I'm going to tuck the end bits under it, and I'm just going to keep wrapping. And I'm going to go back on my wrapping so that I'm securing that end. And I'm going to go back up the arm to try and thicken it a little bit, so you can really, guys, go in any direction that you want to, whatever feels right for you, or that's making and building your doll in an interesting way. And we're wrapping and we're binding. Now, actually, the history of doll making, particularly on the continent of Africa, okay, people and children used to use these techniques of wrapping and binding fibers to create these little dolls, and they'd use anything from the inside of the mealies to whatever they had in their environment. So wrapping and binding is quite an old, and it comes on from ancient times of actually making dolls or figures. And I'm cutting the end again. You should do it in the beginning. I just forgot to. And again, I'm tying that little section off of the arm. And you can tie those knots quite tightly. Right. My arm feels a little bit long to me, so I'm actually going to wrap that in and make that arm even shorter. Right, so now we're just going to create that little hand section of our doll. And what I do is I just create sort of bigger knobs on the end that represent the sort of hand section. And you can see, guys, I'm really pulling that fabric quite tight, like a really tight bandage. And then if you do that strongly enough, then the doll doesn't need any stitching in any way. Sometimes the little ribbon rolls up, so we just need to catch it and open it up again. You want your ribbon to be as open as possible. And you can see I'm going back to the body, going back around the top, back around the head, and now I'm actually going to go around the body a little bit. So I'm going to go through that leg, bring it in right around. I've got my other little piece there, and take this piece right around. So it's just about training our fingers to be a little bit nimble. And I'm tying that bit across the body. And then, so just like you've wrapped that arm, you're going to wrap the body, you're going to wrap each leg and each arm. This little one here, you can see we're going down the leg and just continuing that wrapping until we get right to the end. Of our piece, tying it again, starting up again, and then wrapping the end in until we have a completely wrapped figure. It looks like a mummy with all its bandages wrapped around, until we have a completed figure in that way. Right, so guys, as you wrapping your little figure, sometimes you'll find that you have fabric that's maybe a little bit too thin. So when I started wrapping this arm, I found that it was much thinner than that one. So you can do a number of things just to make it a little bit thicker. You can either cut some more of the leg area off and just add it to the top so that you've got a bit more fabric to bind and to make a thicker arm. Or you could take another piece of your fabric. Those are the hems from the t-shirt that we cut. You can just wrap it around the head and you could make your fabric thicker in that way. So there are all kinds of ways to work with the fabric. Just experiment and see what works for you until you get your hands used to the binding and the thickness. And you'll find that every little doll or character that you make is slightly different. And to end the activity, of course, what you want is you don't want just a naked doll like that. You want to build it and give it a little bit of character. So I'm going to show you some of the dolls that I've made. This is one that I made a long time ago. It was also with t-shirt material, but it was very thick. And so to end it off, I actually had to stitch the end and not tie it in a knot. And if you have little bits sticking out like that, you can ask mum or dad or an older person, if you can't do it yourself, just to help you to stitch the little ends of your fabric down so that your doll doesn't unravel and unwrap. And I just find that I can use any color and that it's just fun to do that until you've stitched your fabric all the way down so that it doesn't unravel. The other thing that you want to do as well with your dolls is that you either want to make some hair. I've made some hair and I've stitched this hair on. You can glue hair as well. I've stitched some eyes and a mouth, but you can also draw a little face on if you don't want to stitch. And I've made just a funny little bun on the top of this doll's hair here. And sometimes you can let your dolls do different things. So this is my doll that's actually hugging. It's my hugging doll, and I've stitched the little arms to the end so that her arms fold over like that. And also you can create little head pieces for your doll. So I like to wrap fabric around the head. It looks like a little scarf as well. And I've done it with this little character here and this character there. And again, you can make bits of clothing. This is just a wide piece of ribbon that's just cut with a little hole in it, like that. And we just create some clothing and some pieces for our dolls. So you can get really creative and experimental as you make your little character doll or a little doll that you'd like to give to someone special over this coming part of the year. I hope you've really had fun today and that you're going to try this activity with us. And next month, as 2021 starts again, we will have a new online open studio activity for you. Stay well, everyone. Blessings to you over the festive season as the year ends, and goodbye.